Morning, everyone. And encouragement, as always, to move closer, get cozy, if you like. You can also be very comfortable in the seats where you're at. We're just very glad to have you with us this morning, and looking forward to a solid conversation. My name is Omari Rush. I'm executive director of a service organization here in Detroit called Culture Source. We're the Cultural Alliance for Southeast Michigan. I also have another bit of a hat that I wear that is the chair of the State Arts Council. And so wearing both of those hats, I'd again like to welcome you all to Detroit and Michigan, and also say, how proud we are of Sphinx as a homegrown organization, and appreciative of the convening of thought leadership and artistic leadership that happens through them here in our area. So cheers to Sphinx, and also cheers to our panelists. And I really appreciate you all being here with us as well. Catherine Dehoney, not Chamber Music America, Chorus America, right. Margaret Leoy, Chamber Music America, and Jesse Rosen, League of American Orchestras. Thank you all again. So this morning's session is called The Captain's Log, What Service Organizations Need from the Field. And we're gonna reframe that actually just a bit. For one, I don't think any of you see yourselves as captains engaged in kind of command and control tactics with the field, but maybe more influencers who are looking to always create fertile ground for folks in your sectors to grow and thrive, for audiences to have delightful experiences. And also, certainly, there's this idea that as stewards of your field, you're influencing based on trends, based on the big picture that you're seeing. And so, as we think about today's session, let's think the steward's log, what service orgs are seeing and tilling in the field. So with that frame in mind, please think about questions that you have for us on the stage, or and use Squiddo, and by Squiddo, I mean Slido. You can search for Squiddo and just text on Slido what Squiddo brings up. I'd be curious. But slido.com, look for SphinxConnect to send us your questions throughout as well. We'll have time at the end specifically for that. So to have the panelists introduce themselves a little bit and to get everyone on the same page with what their organizations are up to, I'd like to ask each of you to talk about the context of the founding of your organization, as well as its original purpose and kind of original purpose and current kind of purpose and work. Catherine, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. Good morning. I'm so glad to be here. Chorus America was founded about 40 years ago, and it was founded really in response to a request or urging from the National Endowment for the Arts, because choral music, they didn't know what to do about funding choral music, and a organization was founded by the leading professional choral directors of the day, people like Margaret Hillis and Michael Korn in Philadelphia, Margaret Hawkins in Milwaukee, that sort of thing. And the whole point was to advocate and support choruses who were paying their singers. And there was a lot of talk about support for professional singers. And over the years, it expanded, and we included more and more different types of choruses, because really the power of the choral field can be found in the fact that there are so many choruses, and it's such an important aspect of public participation in the arts. So today we've grown from, I think, an original core of maybe 11 organizations 40 years ago. We have about 1,600 now members, and we serve children and youth choruses, obviously still professional choruses, large volunteer community choruses, the gala choruses, you name it. We have members of all stripes. And I think today, one of the important things to keep in mind, well, actually, let me give you some fast facts about the choral field, because this is the inaugural weekend of Exigence, and we're just so thrilled that Sphinx is getting behind this incredible professional vocal ensemble. But I bet you don't know a lot about the choral field, so I'll give you some facts you can use at parties. And one is that Chorus America's research showed that about 1 in 5 households in America have someone singing regularly in a church choir, school choir, or community chorus. So that's like 42.6 million people sing every week. It's a lot of singers. We also did research that showed choral singers have characteristics that make them very valuable in terms of activities around civic engagement and social capital and community building. Choral singers tend to vote more often. They give, they're more philanthropic than the average person. They have people over for dinner more frequently. They volunteer their time. They're just superior humans. So it's a really interesting thing that we are using more and more to try to leverage the power of choruses and their sort of inherent community building focus and characteristics to help communities address social issues.
Great, thank you. Margaret.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to know that choral singers are philanthropic, and I'll tell all of our chamber musicians to contact all of the choral singers in their communities. So Chamber Music America was founded 40 years ago by chamber musicians, and the primary reason was because, similar to the choral community, they were primarily interested in funding for themselves, because most of them at the time, all of them pretty much, were not incorporated as nonprofit organizations, so they couldn't go to the usual places for funding. So they went to the National Endowment and said, you should have a program for independent artists and ensembles. And the National Endowment said, if you begin an organization, we will fund the organization and you can fund the ensemble. So we were founded primarily for resource generation. And interestingly, there were 34 people who originally came together. But one person is credited for bringing them together, and that is a gentleman named Michael Jaffe, who was also the founder of the Waverly Consort. And so the Waverly Consort is early music, and you would think that someone, because there is a perception of early music being sort of, I don't want to say stuck, but it's in a particular time period. So you think of them as, well, you know, that's their focus. But Michael Jaffe was such a visionary that when they were deciding what is chamber music, that they came up with a definition that we still use today, which is music for small ensembles between 2 and 10 musicians, with 1 musician per part, generally without a conductor. So that encompasses all different styles of small ensemble music. So we have never said in chamber music that, well, you can't be a member if you play this kind of music. We were started by Western European classical musicians, but as the field itself has evolved, Chamber Music America has evolved. And now we have over 6,000 members who play all different kinds of music, Western classical, Eastern classical, jazz, contemporary, vocal, instrumental, mixed ensembles. It's really an enormous gamut of small ensemble music. So grant making is a big part of what we do, but we also have a lot of other programs for ensembles and what we call independent musicians, musicians who may be part of an ensemble sometimes, but they do a lot of other things as well. And we do a lot of professional development, career development work, because that's so necessary when you are an independent musician and you're not affiliated with a bigger institution. You have to do a lot of the work of having a career on your own. So Chamber Music America kind of fills that niche of where you go as a musician when you need those kinds of services. So that's the short wrap-up of chamber music.
Thank you, Margaret. Jesse.
Good morning. The League was started 75 years ago and was launched in central Wisconsin by a group of volunteer women who saw benefit in coming together to address common issues around their orchestras. And the League, as we know it now, really kind of got kicked off a few years later in 1946 after the Second World War ended. And the League was kind of chugging along in Wisconsin. The large orchestras, though, didn't belong to the League, but they went to Washington to lobby so that the government would waive an excise tax that had been imposed on all organizations during the war. And the big orchestras went to Washington, and their message was, we shouldn't have to pay this tax. We're nonprofits. We're doing good for the community. And so please make us exempt. And what they heard from the policymakers was, you have no constituency. Come back when you have a constituency. And the big orchestras then sought out the League, because the League represented a greater breadth of spread across the United States by that time. And so, you know, the League kind of came together, you know, its genesis story. I always think of it as, you know, at least two elements. One was collective action, and particularly around federal level advocacy. But secondly, the joining together of disparate organizations. And in those days, it was big and small. And that creates, you know, a tremendous tension in our community. And, you know, I always think the Boston Symphony has much more in common with the Museum of Fine Arts than it does with most of the rest of our members. And, but this tension around big and small plays out in many other ways. You know, we have youth orchestras, collegiate orchestras. Up until the 1980s, there were no musicians on the League board, so, you know, who did the League serve? It's always a question. And to this day, whenever we do strategic planning, there's always questions, you know, shouldn't we maybe just have an organization for the big orchestras? After all, their needs are really unique. Wouldn't the youth orchestras be better off on their own so they can concentrate on their own thing? And whenever we have these discussions, we always come back to this central idea that our ability to learn, to sustain healthy institutions, to grow our art form is improved by functioning together. With all of the debates and the arguments, everyone's always mad at us. The little orchestras think we do more for the big orchestras, big orchestras go for the little orchestras, youth orchestras feel like we completely ignore them. And so we have to live with that, and we work those tensions all the time. But I think it's really the animating idea that by coming together across you know, the breadth and diversity of our community, we can actually affect change much better. And so that's kind of I think the animating idea for the League, going back to our inception.
Thank you for those stories of coming togetherness. Jesse, I wonder if you might, regarding those tensions that you mentioned, talk a little bit about how you and your organization always maintain a readiness to challenge the assumptions of your work, to kind of redirect your beliefs about how you should be serving, or who you should be serving, or how you should be organized, or?
Well, we do that a lot of ways. One is that we regard our members as only one of several really relevant stakeholder groups. And we are very active and very involved in numerous coalitions and go to lots of conferences and listen to people talking about a lot of things besides orchestras. And even, within our own way of knowing and understanding issues in our field, we use our board a lot. Our board has as many orchestral musicians as it does orchestral administrators. We try to maintain, a perspective that cuts across the diversity within our field, but we also pay an awful lot of attention to what we hear from our colleagues in the rest of the performing arts and the rest of the arts community. And we are very connected to the national funding community, and we have our ears open and out to listen and learn. And we are part of, numerous discussions with peers, not just in, the large anchor institutions, but also through an association that the three of us belong to, the Performing Arts Alliance, which is a consortium that includes the heads of the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, Alternate Roots, Fractured Atlas, parts of the arts community that is quite different from the one that we inhabit. And I think through, staying plugged in to, the wider ecology is kind of how we try to always get, as complete a picture as we can. Our members only give us one view of what the world looks like, and if we relied only on that, I think we'd be quite limited in our ability to really serve.
Great. Margaret, I wonder if you might comment on the ways that you are plugged in and at any time ready to kind of activate a change and a shift in the way that you work.
So I had never worked for an association before Chamber Music America. I worked for arts organizations. And before CMA, I worked for the Public Theater in New York City, which is a huge theater, does Shakespeare in Central Park. And when I was working there, the general public was never shy about calling after a play and saying, that was the worst thing I ever saw, I'm never buying another ticket. And so when I came to Chamber Music America, I thought, nothing could be like working at the Public Theater. And I was so wrong. I didn't understand the ownership that members take in the organization. And so just listening to what our musicians particularly, we also have concert presenters as members, and they were, very focused on how can we bring more audiences into this music that we love so much. And just by listening to them, I realized that, I realized like, yikes, what have I done by taking this job? This is an enormous responsibility. But sort of looking at it in smaller pieces really helped me as I began to see what kinds of things does the field need, and how can Chamber Music America help? What are the most effective ways that we can help? And one of the things that, and Aaron mentioned it at his keynote on Thursday, looking outside of our field, I think, is an enormously important thing to do. And sometimes the practitioners don't do it as often as they should or as effectively because they're so focused on making a living, particularly the artists, about when am I going to get another job, and how much am I going to be paid, and when can I get a manager, and all those really essential things. So I think Chamber Music America, our responsibility is to call our members and the entire field's attention to trends that are happening in the world that they might not be focused on. And so one example is having come from the Public Theater, which was a very racially and ethnically diverse organization. Coming to Chamber Music America, I thought, I wonder if our members are really tuned into the fact that the demographics of our country is changing. I came in 2000. And so we began to do articles in our magazine that we publish about demographics and how people should be very aware of the communities, that the new communities that are coming into where they live, and how to pay attention to that, and resources for them to go to. And that led to to our annual conference and sessions at our conference about reaching out to audiences, knowing who your audiences are, the kinds of performers, the kinds of music that you are having in your series. And so I think that a combination of listening to our members and knowing what it is that they need, because they are not shy about telling us, and then our looking beyond the actual field for what's happening, what other things are happening in the world that are going to affect how you create your music and how you perform your music. I think that's our biggest challenge and our biggest responsibility.
Thank you for that. Catherine, picking up on Margaret's kind of last point about these kind of trends in the world, I wonder what you're seeing in the world as trends, particularly related to equity, issues of equity, and how you see them affecting your sector of choruses and singers. I wonder if you all have surveyed to see how many households have people that sing in the shower.
The experts I talk to tell me that everybody can sing, and every time I say that, somebody's like, oh no, not me. You would never want to hear me, but apparently that's not true. Everybody can sing. That's a great question. There are a couple real obvious trends in my world right now that may not be so obvious out there. We have, so Chorus America, just like my colleagues, we work very hard to be intentional right now about seeing what's going on out in the world, within and outside of the choral field. And my background is, I came from a fundraising background. I've been in fundraising pretty much all my career. So I'm always looking for those rabbit trails that are leading to the connections to what you want to accomplish and any possible way to get there. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing right now through our magazine, through the conference, through our social media, to link our chorus members to what's going on and opportunities they may not be thinking about in terms of linking with health organizations, social service organizations, to leverage what they do, the beauty of choral singing and that community building capacity to link arms with other organizations. One interesting thing that's come up in the last few years is that we have been working with choruses out there to address issues for transgender and non-binary singers. Because in singing, the parts are tied very closely to gender more often than not. And we first were getting requests for information about how could I make my chorus more welcoming. And we've found experts that we've put in front of the field in terms of, in our magazine and certainly in the choruses, the choral conference, our conference that happens every year. And that has been sort of an example to me of how sometimes the choral field has really been out in front in terms of embracing change in our country, certainly in terms of issues of social equity, where things are a little different right now. Has to do with the fact that the majority of choruses in my membership are nonprofit. They're trying to make it out there as a 501c3 nonprofit. So they have a board, they fundraise, they market, they do all those things nonprofits do. The bulk of those members tend to focus on Western classical tradition style, and the perfect performance of the B minor Mass and things like that. The bulk of diversity in terms of people of color and ethnic music that's happening are in structures that are not nonprofit structures. They're under the auspices of churches or community organizations. It's a very broad statement, I'll admit, but where we are seeing some need and some work to do is to make those bridges between those different types of singing ensembles. And so that has become an impetus in our work. And the other thing we've done recently to get at what's going on and how to focus some of the change that needs to happen is with the help of he's back in your world, Alan Brown, who's a Detroit native, Wolf Brown and Associates. We did a forum in partnership with the Barbershop Harmony Society and the American Choral Directors Association to do an ecosystem forum where we brought in the most diverse, in every sense of the word, representatives of the field. So professional choruses, children and youth, professional singers, teachers, heads of the Gospel Music Association, the Barbershop Harmony, and the women's counterpart organizations, Harmony International, and all ages, all shapes and sizes, to talk about the ecosystem, what the species are, which I've got to stop cracking up every time somebody calls me a species, but I haven't, and it's been 4 years. The species and what resources are exchanged, and where are the weak points. And that work has been really important for us because it showed a serious weak point in terms of what's happening with the pipeline of musicians starting at K through 6, where, you know, in people of my generation, to a person, say they started singing in school. So the pipeline of professional singers, the pipeline of audience members, the pipeline of all choral singers, you know, by and large, it really gets back to school. So, and for underserved communities, that's even more severe, the risk at that pipeline level. So that's the kind of work that Chorus America's been doing to find these areas where we can lead the field, and also to help them realize, especially the ones that are not, the smaller organizations that are not feeling the pressures maybe from the funding world to make these changes, as some of the larger organizations have, is to show them the benefits to get busy now in making the changes they need to make to stay relevant in their communities.
So Margaret, so clearly I have solid memories of singing about Christmas cookies in school, elementary school. But I also, you know that folks have had really solid experiences singing as part of their churches. Mm-hmm. And I guess I wonder what you are seeing. Like, how does that, what's the role of a church these days in that pipeline? Right. And are you seeing changes around their role or, yeah? Yeah.
Certainly with the mainline churches, I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know, that there's a serious decline in church membership. And it's affecting church choirs. So that's a very good point. That pipeline is also a little bit, well, I wouldn't say a little bit. I think and the structures of the services are changing, certainly for the mainline churches. I can't speak so much to the African American and the gospel churches. I can't. I'm not sure what's happening there, but I do know that I've heard recently, I was actually meeting with someone recently who was telling me that, you know, he was an avid singer in a church choir, and now their opportunities to sing in the services have been given over to more contemporary praise music and things like that. So it is an issue.
Mm-hmm. Jesse, related to the different kinds of structures and the ways that issue or kind of ideas about identity are, for instance, are changing approaches to choral music. Are you seeing any trends in the world that may be related to identity, equity, inclusivity that are changing, having structural changes in the orchestral world? Maybe at a specific kind of level, type of organization, or maybe across the whole field?
Yes, and here are some of the things that we're seeing in our field. I think the first thing to say, though, about orchestras is there are 1,200 adult orchestras in the United States, 90% of them have budgets under $1 million. 60% have budgets under $300,000. So usually when there are conversations about orchestras, people are imagining the Detroit Symphony, the Chicago Symphony, maybe Kansas City Symphony, Oakland Symphony. Those are all part of the story of orchestras in America. But there are 1,000 orchestras that are way smaller than those. And I mention this because in the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, it really matters what kind of orchestra you're in and what kind of community you're in. And when we speak with our smaller budget members, many of whom are in rural America, and talk about diversity, often they say, well, there are no black people where we live. This conversation is not meaningful to us. And they're not wrong. I mean, many of our orchestras are in parts of America where diversity takes a form that's not necessarily around race or ethnicity. And often it can be income distribution. And one of the challenges, one of the things to kind of work through in our community in talking about these issues is really the language and what do we mean when we say diversity. Usually it's interpreted as a substitute for race. And to the extent that we're not really clear about what we're talking about, conversations get really stalled and can often go off track. And so, you know, as we've been involved in pretty intense conversations with our membership around diversity, equity, inclusion, we're finding that it's really essential to be clear in each location really what you're talking about. There are, you know, multiple dimensions to diversity, and race definitely has a, you know, unique, distinctive place in this conversation for a million obvious reasons. However, it is not the only conversation around diversity. And so for us to address our whole community, we need to be able to have conversations about gender diversity and sexual preference, about income inequality, about Native American populations, and so on and so forth. So arriving at some clarity around that is kind of an essential piece of us being able to make progress in this area. Another, I don't know if this is a trend per se, but just kind of a state of affairs is that the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, there's a tendency for them to happen in a vacuum, separate from thinking about the entirety of the orchestral organization. And, you know, inclusion, creating environments where people of difference can thrive, is a challenge in orchestras, not only because of people's attitudes and issues around race or gender or ethnicity, but the orchestra organization itself is not organized particularly well to create inclusive environments. And, you know, Alex Lang is a couple of ways of describing it. So he often says, you know, this is the only field where when you get your job, professional development ends. Orchestras are not really organized to support the sustained development and nourishment of talent, whether it's on the stage or in their offices. The benchmark in the corporate sector for investment in talent development is 8%. In orchestras, it's less than 1%. And so in order for there to be productive conversations about difference in the orchestra organization, there also have to be discussions about how is the work organized, what is the role of musicians, how do we create environments that actually nourish and support talent and support the advancement of the organization. And, you know, related to this is also a values conversation. Not everybody believes the same thing around diversity, equity, inclusion, and there are many people for whom, I mean, I had an orchestra board member call me up one day and he said, I don't understand why you're talking about diversity so much. We're a meritocracy. You know, we're interested in getting the best people on the stage in our orchestra. They happen to be black, great. But if they're not, that's really not our problem. Our goal is excellence and quality. And I don't know how widespread that view is, but I've heard it more than once or twice. So there are important values conversations that have to take place in orchestras in order to move through some of this. And then The last piece about the organizational life of orchestras is alignment. And even though orchestras are small institutions, they have very discrete subsets, subcultures, whether it's the musicians, the staff, the board, the audience, different points of view. And in order for progress to happen, there has to be some alignment among all of the internal constituents and stakeholders. And achieving that requires lots of work, lots of conversation across the different disciplines. And maybe the last thing I would say about this is I think that as orchestras have increased their engagement around these issues, there's kind of some folks who are missing in action, and I would say that's mostly music directors. And there's kind of a funny hole in this conversation, which really has to do with the music and an understanding of the music and how the art form that we perform, that we grow, that we sustain. What is the role of the art form and the music itself in advancing a diverse engagement, whether audience, whether composers, what have you? And in conversations around power and influence, it is music directors and orchestras who have that authority, wield power and influence over who is on the stage, what's the music we play, and it's kind of this incredible opportunity we have to bring conductors and music directors into this conversation, and their absence from the conversation nationally, I think, is a huge constraint on really making progress in this area. And maybe one just last thing, if I might, and that's to say that overall, I think the moment that orchestras are in right now, it's a little bit like, I don't know if anyone's read Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, where he studies successful American companies. And there's this idea, and it was really interesting. It's called the Stockdale paradox. So Stockdale was a commander in Vietnam who got captured and tortured. And when he got back, he wrote an article about what happened to his colleagues who were imprisoned. And what he observed was that the ones who thought it was hopeless and that they were not going to survive all died. The ones who thought, we're going to get rescued any day now, they all died. The ones who survived were the ones who held this paradox, which was an appreciation for how dire their situation was, and at the same time had a belief and a confidence that somehow they were going to prevail. And so I think that's kind of where orchestras are now. I mean, there is so much work to do to make the changes that have to happen to make progress in this area. But, and I just say, you have to appreciate those who ask, why is this time going to be different? Why should we think that after 40 years, here we go again, everyone's getting all excited about this, why is it going to be different this time? Have to listen and pay attention to that and think hard about how to answer that question. But it can't stop the forward movement that's happening, and there's tremendous progress happening in our field. So I feel like we're in this paradoxical moment. I'm done, sorry.
Great. No, and so if I were going to ask you a follow-up question, one of the things that I would ask would be a kind of a how question that relates to how you get, for instance, music directors and conductors to work and think differently. I will save that for maybe later on, because I want to ask Margaret to comment on something that you said related to these different kinds of values and different approaches, different beliefs that people in the field have, related to the importance of focusing on equity or a certain kind of diversity. And also related to this idea of you all being maybe more stewards than people that can tell people what to do, How do you think about your role as this kind of sector steward, and how do you then maybe influence the kind of values that you see as being really important to the health and viability of your sector?
Well, I'm going to put in a brief plug for a session that Justin Lang and I are doing at 11 o'clock about Chamber Music America's equity initiative and how we got there. So a lot of, because it's such a big question, and I know we want to get to some questions from the audience, but I also want to answer it. I feel that Chamber Music America's role is to call people's attention to things where their attention is not focused. That's a big part of what we do. And when we look at our musicians, our musician members are incredibly racially and gender diverse. Where the field is not so diverse and is probably not so equitable is in the presenting area, in the competition area, in the music school admission area, in the big prize area. Who are the adjudicators? Who are the nominators? Those things are changing slowly, but up until just maybe a couple of years ago, it was very heavily white and very heavily male-oriented. And that's just a fact. And it's not that people who won competitions weren't worthy. It's not that composers who were commissioned didn't write amazing work. But as we've said in many sessions here at Sphinx, it's not the entire picture. And so what Chamber Music America is trying to do is call attention to all of these areas where members of our field can affect change and are affecting change. And with Chamber Music America's own equity initiative, we also feel that it's not good for us to say, this is what you should be doing. You should be changing your programming, and you should be doing, whatever you are not doing in your community. What we are saying is, this is what we are doing. We are trying to change Chamber Music America from within. And if you can model any of the things that we are doing that will help your organization be better and grow and be more equitable, then we're happy to help you do that. But we feel that for us it's important to be the model of how we are trying to change ourselves, not how we are trying to tell other people how they should change.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And it's perfect partly because it segues into a question that we just got on Slido.com. I hope you all will get out your devices and look for SphinxConnect to send in your questions. Feel free to also, at this point, use the mics as well to ask a question if you have one. Related to a question that we just got, and this idea of changing from within, I wonder if any of you might comment on your boards and staffs and how they embody, or how you're working to have them embody, either in their composition or in their kind of structure of their work, how they embody the values related to equity, related to a kind of a new system of beliefs that's gradually kind of coalescing the country. How they're getting you from within to a place where you're doing the work that you think and believe is best for the field.
The league, it maybe 10 years ago, we invited Aaron Dworkin to join the league board. And Aaron lit a fire under the league board. And it really was the spark that moved the league into much greater, far more active role around diversity. And in recent years, we have increased the number of musicians on our board. And, it's just a truism when you listen to different voices with different perspectives, the work gets better, and you grow in your understanding of the world and where there's opportunity. And I think that it just, these kind of are self-reinforcing things, that when you get past your own habits of how you know what the world looks like, and get yourself into situations where you get jarred into considering that the world might look different, things really move, things begin to happen. The Houston Symphony, they tell an interesting story when they were trying to get themselves involved with more of their community, and obviously very diverse community in Houston, and their board had meeting after meeting after meeting about what to do, what's our strategy, and nothing ever went anywhere. And then finally somebody said, maybe we have to stop talking to each other. Let's talk to people in the community. And so the board figured out that the only way to make progress was to begin connecting with other voices in the community, and that's when they were finally able to make progress. And so I think the board thing is so fundamental. I mean, it is to the extent nonprofits have owners, the boards are the owners. They are the people responsible for the existence of the institution and its direction. And we've continued to try at the League to make our board diverse in many different ways. It's ongoing work. We're nowhere as far along as we'd like to be, but we're making progress.
Okay. We'll take a question.
Hi. Hi, my name is Garrett. I'm a bassoonist with the Knoxville Symphony, and I produce and host classical music on our NPR affiliate. My question is for Catherine. Have you experienced challenges in maintaining your organization's values while engaging organizations like churches who may not be interested in things like non-binary gender inclusion and those sorts of things? Have you experienced challenges at the intersection of those two things?
That's a great question. So I'll say we're at the very beginning of a lot of this work, and I think we will. One thing that Chorus America is committed to doing in the next, we just adopted a new strategic plan, and a component of that is to reach out and really figure out what is it that church-based choruses need from us, if anything, and what can we bring to them, what can they bring to us in terms of enriching our work. But we've always appealed and addressed issues that aren't for everyone. That's a very good point. But there are choruses around special missions that find this kind of work very valuable. There's a huge movement in the what I know it's probably not what it's called anymore, but LGBTQ area that have choruses built around that identity to do social mission work. And there are choruses built around justice. There's a whole new franchise organization starting up called the Justice Choirs. So we find just building upon those kind of ideas and the leadership that's there sort of points to the rest of the field. These are amazing ways you can contribute to address these issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have 2 minutes and 14, 36 seconds. So if we keep our responses tight, we can get in as many questions as possible. Sir.
Okay, this is a real quick equity question for Jesse. You talked about the variation in the sizes of orchestras. You talked about the role of the music director. In some cities, an orchestra really gobbles up a tremendous amount of that city's resources. So let's take the example of Cleveland, where the orchestra probably eats up more than half of all of the resources available to musical organizations in northeastern Ohio. If Franz Welsermost resists this, then it's not simply one orchestra with one music director, it's 60% or 50% or whatever of the northeastern Ohio musical economy that is resisting it. How should the rest of the northeastern Ohio musical economy respond to that?
respond to the intransigence of the Cleveland Orchestra? Is that the question?
Respond to the to a lack of movement, and that's a hypothetical. I don't know the Cleveland Orchestra that well, but there's a lot of equity wrapped up in that one institution.
Right. So now we're down to 57 seconds. You asked the question, it's like a 2-hour answer, but this is a really tough issue for orchestras. And, it's another paradox. Orchestras look rich. They're expensive, and they consume a lot of resource. They are as undercapitalized as any other, part of the arts ecology, despite the fact that they consume vast amounts of resource in their communities. So from inside an orchestra, the perception is, how can we get more? How can we keep getting more to sustain this institution, to have the quality concert halls, the quality instruments, the quality musicians on the stage to deliver the finest performances we can? That costs lots and lots of money. So the ethos inside is we've got to get more, we've got to get more. That's not going to be a strategy that's going to help in this climate that we're in today. And I think what we saw in Boston, where many people in the musical community stepped up to the Boston Symphony and said, we demand more of you. We demand an orchestra that is more representative, more inclusive. To me, I think that's a great thing that's happened, and I think the dialogue happening there is a constructive one. We're actually going to take that dialogue into our conference in Chicago this June. There is a legitimate tension around how to resolve this. Time's up.
Well, so I'm going to just two things. One, if the three of you could just ask your questions very quickly, just put it out into the air, that'd be wonderful. And then I'll close with a final remark.
Okay. My name is Amanda Kemp. I'm actually part of an ensemble that's part of Chamber Music America. I'm a spoken word artist. The question is, what kind of change did you each individually have to go through? You're three visibly white people. I don't want to make an assumption. So when it comes to dealing with racial equity and inclusion, how have you had to shift to be able to lead your organization in that effort?
Thank you for that.
I will say it's 4 people because she was also waiting on that side
too. Great, thank you.
So my name is Un Lee. I work with the Orchestra of St. Luke's and also the Dream Unfinished, which is an activist orchestra. And remarking to Jesse's comment about reframing the diversity work in areas that are possibly predominantly white, I think many would argue that, if anything, those are the areas that need the most work, because it's pointing to systemic issues as far as why they are predominantly white. So my question would be, in addition to addressing the immediately relevant diversity issues that are there, how do you frame this larger question of race that is really impacting the entire country?
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ulysses. I'm here to ask a question about diversity is a very amazing thing. But if you say have 10 black people and they all think extremely the same, you're not going to have, there's no differentiation. You're not going to even have that much of a different product in the ending. So are there any parts working on diversity and ideas as well within that? So say you have all types of different people in there. But I mean, because even within being white, there's of course hundreds of ethnicities there too. And there's diversity in that as well. How do you work on the diversity of the ideas as well as the races?
Thank you. And lastly.
Hi, I'm Janelle Robinson with Art Ops in Southfield, Michigan. And my question is more of a suggestion about the communication that, specifically, Jesse, that you put out. I'm wondering, do you put out information that has stuff about different composers, like black composers or composers of various ethnicities in these predominantly, I'm assuming, rural areas? Just not necessarily to tell them what to do, but showing them the options that are out there, because when I was here on Thursday and they put that stat up, about 100% of the music that's played is from white composers. It was very jarring, so I just wondered, have you all thought about just kind of through your communique with all these different groups, maybe just exposing them on a regular basis to these composers, and hopefully they'll pick up on it. So.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here, certainly. Thank you all for being our panelists and sharing your thoughts with us. There is certainly an opportunity for, now that they've heard these final questions, for you all to integrate responses to them in any blogging that you do, any speaking that you do moving forward, and I hope that you will do that. Also, I'd say they're real people, and so certainly email them or call their offices to be in direct touch. I also would be, remiss thinking about service organizations if I didn't call out one that is very close to where we are physically at right now, and that is the Mariners Church, which if you go out of the Marriott and the kind of valet parking area, you look kind of right at it. The Mariners Church was one of the final stops on the Underground Railroad, and was one of many really important institutions in this area, providing a service in getting folks who are enslaved or free and just wanting a better life, one that's not repressed, and getting them across to Canada. And so, when we think about service and we think about what we can do, there's lots of power that we have as individuals and as collectives of people. I hope that you all will continue to embrace your power to affect change. And again, I thank you for the work that you're doing in your sectors and on behalf of the entire arts and culture community for helping kind of jigger things or move things or shake things up. So again, have a great day. Thanks a bunch.